I would like to introduce from here in Hell and Back again. It is the story that came out of cold storage. You're going to listen to a clip from 1980. It is also archived in the Chicago Museum.
He's now with the New York Times. And Wendell Rawls did something that journalists dream of doing, powerful work. It's called cold storage, and it's about a place, Fairview State Hospital in Pennsylvania for the criminally insane. And the result of his writings have become the book, now available, published by Simon & Schuster. And it's remarkable journalism, but more than that, it's a description, an expose in the best journalistic tradition of horrendous conditions in the 20th century. What happened there, and I'm asking about the results of his work, is, for that matter, horrendous in any century, certainly the 20th. And so he's my guest this morning. Cold Storage, the title of the book and the theme of the conversation after this message. It begins, Wendell, Mr. Rawls, it begins your book with a call that came in to the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Right.
From a guy.
Right. He had been in the hospital. Interestingly, he had made hundreds of calls prior to the one he made the Philadelphia Inquirer. He had called 9 other newspapers. He had called the Attorney General of the state, the FBI, the state police, the hospital, the coroner in the county, and that's really the first man, to pick it up was the coroner of tiny Wayne County.
Each time he was turned down.
Each time everybody
Now, who was
found
this guy
out.
now? Not the name. I know you change names around. You have to, but this guy.
He was a patient who had been in the Philadelphia street gangs when he was a child, a teenager, had been sent away for stealing a car and getting into knife fights and this kind of thing, sent to the juvenile detention center, where he still had to become a leader of the gang, still had to be the leader of the gang inside that place. Got into a fight with a guard and was sent to Fairview State Hospital because he was difficult to control.
Fairview State Hospital.
Right, northeast Pennsylvania.
What is it?
Let me give you a sort of a running litany of what Fairview State Hospital was.
Was, you say?
Well, and to a degree is, which is tragic also, I think. It was a place where decades, 26 years in one case, would elapse between the time a man got there, entered the hospital, and the time he got his first psychiatric evaluation. It was a place where men were denied such basic amenities as toilet paper. If you were a good boy, they would give you a piece of toilet paper. You got no napkins and you got no utensils, so when you ate meat, you had a sort of a dull spoon to cut a tomato with, and it would be muddy. It was a place where a psychiatric hospital without a single psychiatrist. It was a place where a man who was arrested for disturbing the peace and got a 30-day sentence came out of the hospital 32 years later.
The guy you call Kirchhoff.
That's right, the guy called Kirchhoff, which indicates it could happen to any of us almost if we don't approach things as the law tells us to.
You also speak of incredible beatings by the guards toward the inmates center.
Patients were just pummeled senseless for sport. They were just, guards would hold human cockfights is the only way I knew how to describe them, which they would pit two patients together and bet on the outcome. And they would bet with the other patients, and they would bet with each other on which of these patients not only would knock the other one down or knock him out, but literally leave him nothing but a mass of protoplasm, as it were.
I'm going to come to that case of Malone versus Night Train, these two black guys who became the cocks in this fight. Incredible. The beginning now. So the guy, this man
This
guy
survived.
who finally got out, he survived, is calling up, and someone on the paper gets it, the editor.
But prior to that, he had called the coroner in this little county, saying that a man who the hospital said had died of a heart attack some years earlier had in fact been beaten to death and that he had seen it. He makes this anonymous call, however. So the coroner, however, decides it's interesting because he's a good coroner. He got beat later, but he got beat. He got beat politically. The political machine went against him.
We'll come to that.
All right. So he decides he will try to exhume the body. He goes to before the court, petitions a judge in Philadelphia to exhume the body because Philadelphia was where the man was buried. He got permission from the family there, and a 3-paragraph story on the Associated Press came across, just 3 paragraphs. And because my partner at the Inquirer, who became my partner, a reporter there, black reporter, decided, Asa Moore, who is now at Harvard on a Neiman Fellowship, matter of fact, he knew, he had been to Wayne County, and he had met this coroner 7 or 8 months before. But he also grew up in West Philadelphia, where this man who died had grown up. And he said, I think I know this man. I believe I know his family. So he called the family.
That night train?
That's night train in the book. He said, I think I know this man. So he called the family, and sure enough, it was the same man he knew. And the mother said, well, the reason we agreed to let this exhumation go on is because when we saw him in the casket, his neck was bent at sort of a funny angle, and his face was discolored. And we thought something looked suspicious about it. But the hospital told us it was nothing, and that he died of a heart attack, so we let it go. Well, Aesel made this into a 10-paragraph story from a 3-paragraph story. The man then saw, somebody is paying attention to me.
$60.
Yes.
Hey, didn't she?
Those who could afford to pay, it was an unbelievable thing and an irony to us. When we were doing the reporting, we discovered well into the reporting that those who were not absolutely indigent, that the state decided had the ability to pay, would bill them.
So her son, according to this informant, and of course you have a lot of substantial corroborating testimony from others that came along, was killed at the street, and she got a bill of $860
That's
for
right.
his room and board.
For his room and board and for drugs they supposedly had given him.
So you did it. So you followed up on Aesel's hunch.
Aesel and I together started. We interviewed over 200 people. Went through thousands and thousands of pages of
You
documents.
found them first. This guy, your informant, this guy, whom we call Malone, who was one of the fighters in that fight. And then you started looking up over
He said, who else saw this? Who else saw what you saw? Who else knows what you know? And he would give us their names, but he didn't know where they were. And so we began to trace through the prison system and through the parole system and through the state records and track down all these people. We went to 7 states outside of Pennsylvania. Went to California, Colorado, Alabama, Missouri, Illinois. There were lawyers in Chicago who had, as law students.
Out of it came the series of articles and of this book.
Right.
I will ask you as it comes along as the results of what did and what is now. But let's go into the events. You start off, and there's a guy. We call him Garth Wade.
Right.
He's on his way. Well, start with his story. What he did, what was the
Garth
crime, and etc.
He was a country boy. He and his brother in Middle Pennsylvania.
This is a white guy now.
White guy. Grown up near Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the Amish country. He was a country boy, but his father was a very poor farmer, among some very well-to-do and prosperous farmers. One evening in the summer, he and his brother and a couple of other fellows decided to go steal some burlap bags. They're drinking some homemade wine, and they decide, they're poor and they don't have any money. We ought to go steal some of those bags, and we can sell them for $10 apiece. He'll never miss those burlap bags. So they go and steal them, and they go to another farmer's place because another one knew of another, and they stole those 400 burlap bags. And for this crime, because the farmer was a friend of the judge in the county, they get sentenced 10 to 20 for grand larceny. The total value of the burlap bags was less than $150 by the only indictment that I have copies
10
of.
to
Matter
20.
of fact, and he got 10 years to 20 in the state prison.
So now he's in the state prison.
Now he's in the state prison, and he's been there 6 years or so. And he develops migraine headaches, and he's getting medication on a regular basis. Doctors prescribe pills, but they won't let him have them. A guard has to bring them to him, prison guard. So man is late one day. Garth is mopping, and the man is late. The guard is late arriving with his pill, and Garth's head is hurting, and the man finally arrives, and Garth says something to him about where he's been, and the guard has a quick rejoinder of somewhat vulgar nature, and then he hands him the pill and drops it intentionally, steps on it, just cracking the capsule enough to make the bitter taste of the pill come in Garth's mouth. And Garth, seeing it, and the pride is overwhelming him. There are men around looking to see if he's going to take this. He's a good-sized fellow. And so he takes this mop and hits the guard.
And now what
And
happened?
then there's a fight, and they're fighting and wrestling around on the floor. He's pulled away. He's put in solitary confinement. It develops this is the second fight he's had with a prison guard. Another he has had with another inmate. And the prison decides, we don't want to handle him. This is enough of that. And they send him to Farview. No hearing, no lawyer, no doctor saying he needs this sort of help, and he is now labeled.
Now he's heard vaguely about Farview.
Oh, yes.
Right now.
It's in the prison grapevine.
And by the way, did you know much about Farview before you undertook this?
Never heard of it.
You never heard of Farview?
Never heard
As
of
a journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer.
As a
So
journalist,
it's
I
a
never heard of it.
well-kept secret.
Oh, yes.
Farview for the criminally insane.
The same man had called 9 other newspapers Both of the other papers in Philadelphia, the two in Harrisburg, two in Pittsburgh, and none of them would listen to him.
Harvey was a Pennsylvania secret.
Oh, yes.
Okay, what you just listened to was the interview by Wendell Rawls Jr., who wrote the book Cold Storage about the very story that we are talking about. And this is the ripple effect of the book Cold Storage. And you could, when you put yourself into where the mindset that we're headed to, we're trying to explain to everybody that that book Cold Storage, a lot of things sprung from it. And I'm going to reintroduce George. And George Fenella was the son of one of the prisoners. And George he's going to share about the ripple effect of that book by Wendell Rawls Jr., the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the New York Times. Go ahead and welcome back, George, to the program.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. It's good to be on your program again. And I cannot emphasize too much that when you put unjustly a man in a place like Farview Hospital for the criminally insane, it affects many, many people way beyond those walls and for a long time, maybe for 100 years. And I'd like to tell your audience what it did to me, just for openers, as a son of George Stephen Fenella. Well, the name Fenella was stained in the neighborhood. Now, this was a son who was who was declared criminally insane. So the buzz, the gossip was all about the Fenella family being a bunch of must be bad seed, to have a criminally insane. And he had brothers and sisters who were stained, and their children were stained. But most directly, I was the son, George Paul Fenella, even carried his name. And everybody said, well, he'll probably end up the same way. And then they talked around the dinner table about it. Wasn't that something? That George Fenella ended up in the criminally insane. And his son, have you ever noticed how he'll get angry on the ball field? And then pretty soon their kids go out and carry that poison out of the playground into the school, and they try to provoke me. And it just so happened that I grew up strong and quick and tough because of the orphanage and other things. And they knew how to push my buttons by saying, aren't you the son of that criminally insane? Don't you have a father that's criminally insane? Of course, the fist fight was on. Now, when you fist fight people, as often as I did, bad things can happen. You can really injure somebody or really get injured yourself to a point where it could end up with serious injury, and you could be right into the system. And it's a miracle that didn't happen, People can bang their heads off a concrete sidewalk or whatever, and the next thing you know, the prophecy is being fulfilled. The son is in trouble all the time and headed down the same path as his father. Not without, them admitting that they have choreographed, they have orchestrated this play.
Yeah.
Because it's entertaining for the neighborhood. People like to gossip. They like to create drama. And oh boy, this was food for the grist for the mill. It was grist for their little mill. And boy, when you're a young boy and you're full of hormones and people are provoking you and saying things that'll push your buttons like that, using your last name against you. Now let's carry this even further. Let's say you don't have any playmates because everybody thinks you're the son of a lunatic and they see you fighting all the time. And then it comes time when you start to want to get interested in girls. And do you think you can bring a girl or even a boy over to your home to introduce you? Well, you don't really have any brothers and sisters to protect you, and you don't have a father. He was taken away from you. And all of the wages that he would have made in his lifetime, millions of dollars, were taken away from you. And his guidance, his wisdom, his protection. And your mother didn't really want you. And you were ashamed of who you were and who she was. So you didn't bring any friends over to the house. You didn't date girls or invite them to come. Like in those days in the 40s and 50s, the custom was you invited your friends over to your house to meet your parents, like Donna Reed, Ozzie and Harriet, Father Knows Best kind of life. Well, I didn't have that. I couldn't invite anybody over. I lived this church mouse existence and, solitary, without friends, without family, without a girlfriend, and so on and so on. The only thing that saved me is my interest in science. But even that worked against me, and I'll tell you how. Because not only had I a reputation for being strong with my fists and quick with my temper because of all the provocations, but now I was into science and rocketry. So they added that into their little drama and said, not only is this guy a bully, but he's dangerous. He's always messing with these dangerous things like rockets. And, oh my God, you don't want to be around him. You might get blown up with one of his rockets or something. So I became known as a kid with a quick temper, strong and quick physically, who was always, messing with stuff that, from science. So, naturally, people wanted to stay pretty much away from me. So now you become even more isolated. You're ashamed of your last name. You can't speak it. You're tagged with it, George Paul Finella, everywhere you go. Now, as you grow up, you go into job interviews, and you go to functions, and people, they love to talk about their family. Oh, they're so proud of their father. And then they come to you. And what can you say about your father?
And your
Nothing
dad
good.
was and your dad was
Yeah,
incarcerated, and the ripple effect, the years that it stole from your family, and the damages. We were going to talk about that. We're going to have a very quick break here in a moment because the tape will run out here. Can you just give me about 1 minute and just tell us in a short version about the ripple effect, what damages you would want from Pennsylvania, because this is Pennsylvania's dark secret about the psychiatric industry.
all right. Jennifer, I can tell you that if Pennsylvania was to compensate me for what they did to my father and me, it would run into many millions because that man would have earned millions. He was a bright, energetic father. Until this happened to him, he would have been a very productive citizen of the United States of America, and he would have made millions of dollars in his life. And then the effect that it had on me, I would say the damages run into at least $100 million in damages for what was done to me, because it wasn't just done to me. It was done to his brothers and sisters. It was done to my children who carry that last name and their children. In other words, this goes on for 100 years when people, ignorant, selfish bureaucrats who only were interested in his slave labor and feeding him nothing and peeing on his food, they not only hurt him horribly, they hurt his son, they hurt all the children of his son, they hurt his relatives, they hurt the community, they hurt the country, and they should be punished and made to pay until it hurts, because what they did inflicted tremendous pain upon countless numbers of people.
I want to say one thing as we
America.
wrap this part up. We're going to wrap up part 1. We're going to get into part 2. And what I want you to do is give me just one chance to wrap this up because I know the tape is about to run out. I want to say something to the neighbors and the people that went along with this in Harrisburg and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, people who knew about this. These are things that do not hide itself. They have a way of coming out. And the stories of places like this was like a forced work labor camp and using him as a forced labor. That is what human trafficking is. And we know that the modern sense, but back then in 1940 and 1950, it may not have been called that, And we know in a modern sense, this would be like what equivalent to what the Third Reich would have done, just Stalinist. I mean, that's the closest thing to Stalin that you could get is the cockfights, the human, the degrading of human beings. So we're going to wrap it up here for part 1. George, I'm going to give you the last word because this is the last of it. You got about 30 seconds.
Well, I think that the state of Pennsylvania and everybody directly or indirectly involved in this should be made to pay until it hurts. And I'll tell you why, not out of vengeance, but they inflicted hurt and pain on countless people, and they need to understand by feeling pain themselves what it felt like to be on the receiving end of their mendacity because of their selfish, greedy, narrow interests they inflicted. You know, if you take an automobile out and you're joyriding and you kill a family, you pay, and you pay a lot, because you may have been having a time in your life, but you just murdered 4 people in another car, 4 innocent people, and you've got to pay. We make them pay in courts for that. Well, what's different here when you murder a family, when effectively you kill a man, he's brain dead. Now, my father was a dead man walking when I found him. It's, you know, on that day, he was dead but not buried. They had already annihilated his brain, and what they did to him, shortened his actual life, is outrageous. And what they did to me, what they did to his family, what they did to my children, and what they will continue to do.
2 seconds.
That name has to be resuscitated and honored, not be shamed of.
Thank you for that few minutes. We'll be back after this.